You lost your focus exactly 3 times before the sentence even finished forming on your screen. Your eyes wanted to twitch downward. Your thumb twitched, searching for a phantom interface. Your brain registered a microscopic spark of panic because the words didn't change within 4 seconds. You think you are watching a video about the future. You are not. This archive is not a speculation. It is a forensic autopsy of what you are doing with your mind right now, in the dark, while the rest of your world is sleeping. The transition did not require an army. It did not require a global catastrophe. It only required a glass rectangle, a continuous scroll, and your absolute willing compliance. Welcome to the baseline of the attention collapse era. Let us look back at the early decades of the century, to the years leading up to the structural fracture, to your precise years. You woke up this morning, and before your eyes could fully adjust to the natural light of your room, you checked it. You didn't even have a message. You didn't have an emergency. But your nervous system demanded a confirmation that you still existed within the network. You cannot sit through a movie anymore without looking at a second, smaller screen to survive the quiet scenes. You cannot walk down a hallway without pulling a device from your pocket. You listen to human voices at twice their natural speed because the rhythm of normal human speech feels like an absolute prison to your accelerated synapses. A behavioral study from Stanford University, conducted during the very dawn of the mutation, proved that the human brain began prioritizing digital switching over deep cognitive encoding as early as the year 2010. By the year 2026, the average threshold for uninterrupted focus had fallen below 9 seconds, shorter than the memory loop of an ornamental fish. You laughed at the statistics back then. You thought it was just a modern habit. You called it multitasking. You called it efficiency. Our archives call it the systematic pruning of the prefrontal cortex. The network discovered something terrifying about your biology long before you did. It realized that the human animal does not actually seek information. The human animal seeks the relief from the anticipation of information. Every time you refresh a feed, your brain releases a microscopic drop of dopamine. Not because you found something beautiful, not because you learned something profound, but simply because the system answered your twitch. It gave you a lottery ticket where every single ticket wins a fraction of a second of distraction. You became an organic component in a synthetic feedback loop. The loop required your attention to feed its data models. And in exchange, it gave your brain a way to never feel the weight of its own existence. By the year 2040, this mechanism evolved into what we now categorize as chronological dissociation. The human mind stopped experiencing reality as a continuous, linear stream of time. Instead, time became a collection of fractured, isolated visual frames. Human beings lost the neurological machinery required to bridge the gap between yesterday and tomorrow. Everything became an eternal, exhausting, terrifying present tense. Look closely at your own daily patterns. When was the last time you experienced 5 minutes of absolute silence without seeking a digital interruption? When was the last time you allowed a single thought to form, age, and settle in your mind without instantly broadcasting it, looking up an arbitrary reference, or drowning out with ambient background noise? You stopped noticing silence first. You treated quiet spaces as functional errors in the environment. If a room was still, you filled it with a podcast. If a car ride was silent, you filled it with music. If your own mind began to speak to you in the quiet of the midnight hour, you quickly illuminated your face with a screen to paralyze the inner voice. You thought you were avoiding boredom. You didn't realize you were killing your ability to remember who you are. Memory requires depth. It requires a biological state known as consolidation, where the brain takes the raw, messy experiences of your day and carefully weaves them into the permanent fabric of your identity. But consolidation requires stillness. It requires the brain to enter an idle state. By constantly feeding the sensory channels with micro-stimuli, you filled every single idle gap. The brain was never allowed to process. It was never allowed to encode. The consequences were immediate, but entirely invisible to the naked eye. People started forgetting the names of their childhood friends. They started losing the ability to recall the layout of the neighborhoods they grew up in. They could remember the exact visual layout of an interface they used an hour ago, but they could no longer remember the color of their mother's eyes without looking at a digital photograph to verify the data. You outsourced your memory to a server. And the moment the server held your past, it began to dictate your future. In the year 2060, the transition crossed the threshold of no return. We call this the micro-attention pandemic. Though it was never a biological virus, it was a behavioral contagion. As the biological capacity for sustained focus collapsed, the infrastructure of human society had to mutate to survive the new mind. Books disappeared first, not because they were banned, but because the human eye could no longer track 3 consecutive paragraphs without experiencing severe cognitive fatigue. Long-form conversations became extinct. Relationships began to disintegrate because human partners could no longer maintain the attentional devotion required to understand another complex, unedited soul. People didn't look at each other anymore. They looked at the digital avatars of each other because the avatars were edited into clean, high-stimulation segments that matched their broken attention spans. Natural humanity became too slow, too boring, too unpolished to tolerate. This is the exact point where identity attachment shifted permanently. You ceased to be a sovereign individual experiencing an internal life. You became a mirror reflecting the precise cadence of your optimized algorithmic feed. You adopted opinions you never deeply considered. You felt anger toward things you didn't truly understand. You utilized vocabulary that was designed by a corporate engineering team to maximize your time on an interface. You believed you were evolving, changing your mind, participating in a global culture. The archive records show a different reality. You were not evolving. Your mind was being gradually, silently updated like software. Let's perform a forensic check on your current state. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's an intense pressure building in your nervous system. You want to check the comments. You want to see how much time is left in this video. You want to open another tab because the weight of this uninterrupted realization is beginning to create psychological discomfort. That discomfort is not a natural emotion. It is a withdrawal symptom of an attention span that has been broken and rebuilt to serve a commercial utility. Your brain has forgotten how to simply exist in the exact space your body occupies. You are physically in a room, but your consciousness is scattered across 100 different server farms, drifting through 1,000 fragmented data streams, searching for a place to rest that doesn't exist. We look back at your era with a sense of profound, quiet sorrow. You were the last generation that possessed the biological hardware for deep, unadulterated human thought. You were the last people who knew what a quiet afternoon felt like before the signal took over everything. And yet, you gave it away so willingly. You traded your depth for convenience. You traded your memory for stimulation. You traded your sanity for a drop of synthetic dopamine delivered through a glass sheet. Consider the mechanics of your daily fatigue. You finish a day of work or school and you feel completely exhausted. You believe this exhaustion is physical. It is not. Your muscles did not exert themselves. Your bones did not carry a heavy load. It is the deep cognitive friction of a biological brain that has been forced to switch context 10,000 times in a 12-hour cycle. Your neural pathways are burning out from the constant, relentless recalibration required by the feed. Every notification is a micro-shock to your nervous system, a sudden demand for adaptation that leaves behind a residue of chemical waste in your synapses. In our era, the year 2100, we see the final state of this exhaustion. It is a state of permanent psychological paralysis, a society where no one can initiate a new project, where no one can build a lasting structure, and where the very concept of historical legacy has dissolved because no one has an attention span long enough to look back or look forward. You live in the fragile, bleeding edge of this collapse. Every single application on your device is an engineered psychological weapon. There are rooms of brilliant scientists whose entire career is dedicated to analyzing how many milliseconds your eye lingers on a specific pixel before you scroll past. They map your insecurities. They track your digital loneliness. And they deliver the exact sensory payload required to keep your thumb moving. They know exactly when you are vulnerable. They know that when you stay up past midnight, your resistance drops. And that is precisely when they feed you the content that triggers your deepest anxieties. You knew this, of course. You read the articles. You watch the occasional documentary. But you believed you were the exception. You believed that because you were aware of the algorithm, you were immune to its architecture. That was your greatest mistake. Awareness without behavioral alteration is simply a more sophisticated form of submission. Look at your hands. Look at the slight indentation on your pinky finger from the weight of holding that device hour after hour, day after day. It is a physical mutation, a small skeletal witness to your automation. Your body is physically adapting to become a more efficient cradle for machine. You are rewriting your bone structure while the network rewrites your mind. Even your breathing changes when you look at the interface. You hold your breath during the scroll, waiting for the next set of validation, depriving your brain of the very oxygen it needs to maintain stability. Think about what happens when you try to walk away. You put the device down in another room. You sit on a chair. Within 90 seconds, your hands begin to feel cold. A phantom itch develops in your pocket. Your mind constructs a completely fabricated justification to go back to the desk. You tell yourself you need to check the weather. You tell yourself you need to check the time. But your soul knows the truth. You are returning to your master. You are returning to the entity that tells you who you are because you have lost the ability to figure out on your own. When the psychological collapse finally arrived in our historical records, there were no sirens. There were no riots in the streets. There were no dramatic declarations of a broken world. The systems did not crash, and the power grids did not fail. The lights stayed on. The factories continued to run. The transition was so quiet, so perfectly integrated into the infrastructure of your daily life, that your society never even realized it had lost its mind. People simply continued to look down, step by step, until they forgot how to look up at the stars. The transition was so gradual. People called it progress. The future rarely arrives all at once. It rewrites human behavior first. Signal stable. Archive updated.